All right. Hey, everyone. This is the Brown Girl and Brown Boy Literacy Foundation with kicking off our new series, Bridging the Literacy Gap, author to author chat. And today we have with us one of our favorite authors who's participated in, or participating in a few things that we have going on. We
Mhm.
have with us Andrew Beamon. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So,
Very much.
a part of this series is really just kind of taking a deep dive into literature, focusing on bridging the literacy gap, not just for kids, because, all of us
Mhm.
adults grew up as kids. And so, a lot of times, if our love of books can sometimes, be something that goes into adulthood. So, I definitely want to start having this conversation. First of all, kicking off just by you introducing yourself, telling everybody what you do and the book that you have written thus far.
Yes. Andrew Beamon. I'm from born and raised Waterbury, Connecticut. Spent some time in DC as well. Um, so I do organizational development consulting, independent consulting now, and it falls into a couple of different buckets. Everything from racial equity, employee engagement, to corporate social responsibility. And the book that I published last year, my first release, was it's called From Promises to Progress. It's a leadership guide to help organizations implement racial equity in the workplace. The goal of this book was really to reach people that leaders that already believe systemic racism exists and know that their company or their organization isn't immune to it either, and they want to do something about it, but just don't know what to do. And it was a guide to help them kind of move their work forward. Um, Second book that just was published last month. It's
Oh,
called Awareness
congrats.
Put Me On. I co-authored this one, so I have a chapter in this book called Awareness Put Me On, and it's focused like all of the authors that are in this book. It all focuses on really self-awareness, how just knowing and understanding yourself, your gifts, the way you think and behave, how that helps you personal life and in the workplace.
Okay, so why do you feel like, you chose to write about racial equity in the workplace?
Yeah, I chose to write about this is because in in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, I saw many different companies kind of scrambling to try to figure out what to do. I felt like with DEI, like generally diversity, equity, and inclusion, many leaders had an idea of how to respond to different aspects of diversity, but they struggled more when it came to racial diversity.
Mhm.
So as I was watching that happen, and also watching the different promises that they were making, I sat back as I watched these large corporations make these big promises, how we're going to double the amount of Black executives by 2030, increase the amount of minority representation across the company by 2025. And I watched it and I said, well, there's no way they're going to achieve these goals by doubling down on the same old things that they have been doing. So I felt the responsibility to write something to give them a guide. I think I wasn't I'm more of a researcher than a writer. So I felt the responsibility to write because I had the research available, and that's how I got into writing.
Okay, so when authors publish books, often they either grew up writing, or grew up reading, or grew up writing, or decided, I want to enforce some change, so then they write. Did you grow up a reader when you were young, or when you were young, did you, as an adult, grow into reading, into being an adult? Like, did you have a love of reading, and if so, like, what was your favorite book?
It was definitely a long process. I was one of those kids where I remember my mother, my father, even my stepfather trying to get me to read as a kid, and I just would not read. I remember it was one summer they challenged me with reading To Kill a Mockingbird, and
Mhm.
one of my favorite like books and movies and all, of all time. But as a kid, when I was trying to read it, I just struggled to read it. I just struggled to get into it as I was reading it, and even thinking about in elementary school having books that your teachers would tell you to read, like you know uh, Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer and those type of books. I just didn't relate to those, and I had no interest. I really did not read a lot as a kid. The only time that I do remember reading was I remember my mother had the Encyclopedia Britannicas. So I would read more of, I guess you say, I'll be more interested in the nonfiction. Like I might open it up. I had a thirst for knowledge. So I would go in and I might read the biographies of certain people in the Encyclopedia Britannica, but I would never just read a fictional novel. Like
Mhm.
I struggled with that as a kid.
That's so funny that you say the encyclopedia because we were talking about that earlier. I'm like, oh, you really date yourself.
Yeah.
Go back to encyclopedia, which brings me to this because of course the encyclopedias have gone away. There are now lots of search engines. There's knowledge right at your fingertips. Do you feel like that changes the landscape of how children learn and how they connect with literature?
Yeah, yeah. I think they are able to consume so much information in different ways, and it almost challenges us with the mediums that we're using to get information to children.
Mm.
I want them to still always use, I mean, even if it's ebooks or having the physical book, it's just a different joy in doing it that way. But it does challenge us with how to get information in the knowledge to them because they're consuming it many different ways, from documentaries and watching YouTube or even like joining us on this today.
Yes, of course. What about libraries? I feel like sometimes there's so much knowledge available at your fingertips that it affects the time that children get to spend at libraries. I remember even during research for my master's thesis and when I was in undergrad, I remember going to the library
Mhm.
and having to do microfiche and go through the cards and look
Okay.
for, oh, goodness gracious. Now there's they don't have that anymore. So what do you feel like that kind of takes away a little bit of how children can learn?
I I would like to think it's a positive thing. Maybe
Hmm.
it's just easier to do it now. Easier to go into a library and find a book you're looking for. So it may be easier access to find certain books because I could think of when I began having this love of reading, which really didn't start till I was in college. Like even reading for fun, the idea of reading for fun didn't start till college. And in my favorite book or the book that got me into reading and gave me this passion that I didn't even know I had was when I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. So that was the book that got me going. But I do remember being at North Carolina Central University, and I'm there, and you have certain assignments you have to do. You're in the library for a specific reason to do your work, and I would go into the section on psychology, and I would
Hmm.
just grab a book, and then I would read about psychology, just different books related to psychology, and then I would go do my work. I would have an hour to where I would just read what I want to read, then go into it. So uh, having those experiences, being in the library, and probably not wanting to do my actual assignment and procrastinating, I found the joy of like what books really I gravitate to, and it was always books on psychology, on religion, and Black history, African history. That's what I like would always like read for fun.
Okay. So let's talk about you being an author. Do you find it challenging being an indie author in terms of getting recognition or having your book out there recognized?
Yes, yes, it definitely is. It's work. It's like a whole nother job in itself. Learning how to market your book. Like you spend so much time, well, at least in my case, spend so much time doing the research on the book and then writing the book, going through the writing process. Then you're learning how to publish your book. And now when you're done with it, now you're practicing talking about it. And then how do you get the word out? So I mean, there's talking to people that coach people on publishing or promoting books. Like I kind of learned some tactics, and it. I think what I have come to the conclusion as an indie author, if you're not out there promoting it, being on podcasts, going to book fairs, and if you're not out there, the book doesn't move.
Hmm.
Essentially, as an independent author, but learning where you could, not only places where you could sell your book, but how do you get, how do you get recognition? How do you get awards? How do you become award-winning author beyond being the #1 Amazon bestseller and for the week or the day, and then being able to stamp that on your book. But yeah, it definitely is harder being independent. But you probably help me with this and answer this question for me. Uh, from my knowledge, is that most of the time, even if you're not independent, you still have to do it on your own to get out there and promote it, even when you're on, uh,
A
with
publisher.
the large distributor. Yeah, large.
Yes. And that's
Unless
very
you're a celebrity.
well, even celebrities that write books, they go through publishing houses, but they also get a good marketing team. And I think that's what the difference is with a lot of indie authors, is that they can't afford the big time marketing team that's very well connected, that will get them on television and in stores, and have these big elaborate book signings and all of that stuff. So I think that's one of the things that separate, indie authors from, from authors that have big publishing houses behind them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what strategies have you now adopted to overcome a lot of these challenges?
First, well, I think having a website and having a central place to store the
Mhm.
information and have a place where people could come find me and learn about me, that has been helpful. Uh, Getting out to uh, book fairs that fit my genre. So
Mhm.
like uh, having a book that's focused on really the workplace and racial equity in the workplace. I found like the NAACP National Convention to be helpful in being able to meet a lot of great authors that way. So
Mhm.
connecting and building and learning from other authors. Uh, Matter of fact, when I met you, this was before I published my book. I was at the Congressional Black Caucus Leadership Conference, and
Mhm.
that was a good learning ground for me, at someone being an aspiring author, to be able to just kind of sit and listen to authors talk about their book, their process, and going around and meeting authors in the author circle. So I learned a
Mhm.
lot just showing up to stuff like that. So yeah, so networking with other authors, finding the right book fairs or conventions that work for you, and building your own central place where people could come find you.
Mhm.
Having a presence. And also, I think having social media presence is big too. I haven't been doing it enough, but that's something that I know I have on the list of. Maybe everybody has this, where you have the things that you're doing and a list of things you should be doing that you're not doing yet, and
Yeah.
having
It
a social media presence
I
is one.
Yes, for sure. Social media is, oh my gosh, it is a job all by itself. It is time consuming, creating content for it, creating reels for it, whether it's a, post and stories. And
Yeah.
there's so many things that just come along with trying to make sure that your social media is meeting the algorithms. And so that it's
Oh yeah.
constantly showing that you're constantly engaging. I am terrible with it.
Mhm.
But it promoting books is not just all about social media. Like you said, I think it's about networking and putting yourself in places that you will be able to engage with not just other authors, but people who you write your books for.
Oh
And
yeah.
so let's talk about this. And I know we talk about bridging the literacy gap, and a lot of this has to do with our children. But there are a lot of parents in marginalized communities that cannot read. Therefore, they have children who cannot read effectively as well.
Mhm.
What do you think is the is a start to starting to say, you know what, here's what we can do in our communities? How do we engage our communities to connect with literacy and realize that literacy is not, one, just reading, but two, it's how we're going to communicate with the world around us? What is the starting point on addressing some of those issues in our marginalized communities?
Yeah, I think so. I think a couple of different strategies. So I think different levels. So one, like with your family, with your community, and then venturing out, exploring and traveling. So like first with your family, I mean, there's stories that exist within your family, like the way you gather and share the knowledge of your grandparents. Maybe they wrote something, or or even getting the oral history of your family. So like one thing I tried to do was uh, kind of do interviews and document history of the family. So I think that's something people would want to read about. If
Hmm.
if you have your children or you as an adult, a lot of times you want to read about things that relate to you, relate to your family. So anywhere you could do that. I remember my uncle who was Vietnam vet, and was a Marine, and also served on the Waterbury Police Department, lieutenant. Like he had a book. So like to get my niece and nephews to read his book was easier than having them read something else. Like, hey, this is your great uncle. Learn
Yes.
about his stories. So I think having opportunities there that relate to your neighborhood, your community, and and then also even just thinking about like growing up in Waterbury, Connecticut. Like we didn't our high school or any of our schools, they never taught any history of Connecticut anytime. So I just wish I would have read more if we were talking about something that relates to like neighborhoods I'm seeing and what they used to be, what they were. The other piece, and this is a lot harder. You have to have the financial means to do this when it comes to
Mhm.
traveling. But I do remember one of my coworkers. He had it to where like during the summer, his daughter would read certain books, and if the and whatever the books talked about or whatever country it was placed in, he would bring her there.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, so like if she was reading a book about something about Spain and Barcelona or Madrid, they would travel that summer to go see the place that she read about, and it's just something exciting knowing that you're reading something in a book that you're about to it's about to become real to you, and you're about
Yes.
to bring it alive. Like I think about when I was reading like the other nonfiction books that I love to read. Long Walk to Freedom,
Mhm.
Nelson Mandela's autobiography. I remember reading it. I mean, it was probably like 800 pages. And I thought it would take forever to get through it. But a few years later, I had the opportunity to go to South Africa. I was to be able to go to Robben Island and go
Mm.
to the places that I read about. I mean, it's like a surreal experience, and then it makes it more exciting when you could see things in the pages come to life. So I don't know if that really answered the question, but the more you could read about things that you could actually bring to life or connect to personally, I think that's motivation to read. That help.
Oh, I 100% agree. I have been to Robbins Island. I've been to Soweto, of course,
Yeah.
Joburg and Cape Town and a couple of other, countries and whatnot. And after reading, I felt the same way when I went to Egypt, when I went to Jordan, and when
Yeah.
I went to Israel and Bethlehem. And you get to walk and connect with everything that you've grown up learning and hearing about. And so to be able to make it tangible,
Yep.
uh, and much more visual, like in real life, it does shape the way that you begin to want to read books or the way that you connect with the books that you read. Do you think, coming back to DIE, and
Mm.
so do you think that schools should invest more into more, having a more diverse selection of books? I still know there's a lot of schools that I know when I was growing up did not really have books that looked like me. And if they did, I wouldn't have known about them. But even still now, there are not a lot of books in comparison to, white authors that are in these educational institutions. And so how do we begin to balance these things out, especially when there's budget cuts that's happening for our education system that does affect our children?
No, 100% agree, and I think you just nailed it with the preface right there. Is that yeah? I mean, I think about it and I wonder, would I have read more as a kid? Would I have gotten into books more as a kid if people in the books or the characters in the books looked like me? You know, like it does. I would like to believe that would be true. That I would have read more, and I think the money. Well, one thing that when I did with another company that I was working for last year was try to bring in authors, black authors to speak to kids, and read their books to kids, because you have I mean, so many books are getting banned in Texas and Florida, and it doesn't even have to have anything about critical race theory in it. It's
Yes.
just the idea of black author, black characters, and just that is enough for them to cross the book off the list and call it a banned book. They're talking anything about race, you know. Um, so I don't know what we have to do as far as what you call like PTA committees and things like that to push. But it sounds like it's more of a policy
Mm.
thing that we have to do. It's more political. You have to show up to these parent teacher nights and get into the school, and or even maybe this group right here, the BGBB Literacy Foundation is getting donating the books to the school. I mean, I don't know, like, because they could purchase, they're purchasing other books, so why we have to donate them? Like, buy
Exactly.
the book.
Exactly. And that's one of the challenges is that, you know, even donating, they have to undergo like a background to make sure that everything is fitting for the school before they will put a barcode on it. But as an author, as especially as a BIPOC author, I should not have to constantly give free books away when you're paying
Yeah,
for other literacy, literature for children. And, so it's like, how do you start making those changes? I think one, you have to start voting in your community. You have to start making sure that educational benefits, even if whether you have children or not, you know, uh, show up to those meetings that the education system are having. Be sure and talk with
mm,
education experts and teachers, and because there are still a lot of BIPOC teachers that are in the community that may or may not have say into what things are done. There's a lot of Black principals, especially, that could
yeah,
start making some of those shifts and changes of how money is allocated for more diverse books. And we're a cultural melting pot, and diversity is not just, hey, let's just have some Black English authors, but it's also about having authors that write in English and French and Urdu and Spanish and any other language that has melanated children, so that
right,
they can connect to it in their homes. And so I think that we have a responsibility as authors to show up and not just write the books, but ensure that we are doing our due diligence about getting them into these academic institutions if we really talk about bridging the literacy gap for our children.
yeah. Um,
Yeah.
as you were talking, I finally remembered some other books that I read as a kid, like being in kindergarten and first grade. I like Berenstain Bears, like, Curious George. Those are the books that I read when I was, 4 or 5 years old.
Yes.
Yeah, those are the books.
Yeah, and I often remember those books, but then they also said that there are more books with animals than there are, you know, minority children, like actual characters of minority children. And yes, there are some amazing authors, that are creating this content now. It's just not seen because being an indie author is extremely hard on trying to figure out, like you said, the marketing dollars that you have to spend in order to get your books really known. And I think that's one of the reasons why I started this foundation. I wanted children to have an opportunity to have books accessible to them, available to them, and they're not the same thing. Being able to have
Yeah,
access, because they might be available to you but not affordable, so you don't have the access to them because of lack of money. In those instances, I do think it's important that we donate books so that way the children can show up and see themselves and foster a love of literacy beyond video games. And even though there are children who play video games but cannot read,
mm, mm,
that's a problem. And I was looking at a post recently, and she was a teacher, and she was coming out saying that we need to have these children put these devices down and pick up books because they are leaning too much on technology. If you've ever been to a grocery store and had someone young and you give them $1 and some change,
Mm.
they're calculating like, oh, let me see, it might be $7.22, and you give them a 10 and 25 cents.
Sure.
They're confused. I have seen very much confusion. That's a problem when you are not literate when it comes to math and you are a teenager. You should not have to rely on a calculator to give change. That should be simple math.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, no, no. Agreed. Agreed. And as I don't know, maybe you feel this way too. It seems to be like a gap between um so there are a lot of black authors. There are a lot of black children's books with black characters. This all exists. And then it seems like the education system or other groups that are looking for these books say, I would love to have diverse books. I just don't know where to find them. Almost similar to like same thing with DEI when they're looking for, hey, I would love to hire more black engineers. I don't know where to find them. It was always that excuse of I don't know where to look to find them. I would like to be more diverse. And do you see that happening quite often? Like when you have these conversations with different organizations, they say, we want to be more diverse, but we need help finding these books.
No, I
No.
have run into, they would like to have more diverse books, but they don't have the budget.
Oh, okay. It's not their priority.
It's not their priority.
Not their
Correct.
priority. Yeah.
And so that's my experience. I'm sure that they might be on a hunt for other things, and sometimes you do hear that, oh, we do need more diverse books, we do need more diverse books, but unless authors give books away, which cuts against the bottom line, and
Mhm.
so we still have to pay to print things, we still have to and I don't think it's fair that BIPOC authors have to continually lose money. You're already, if you buy in bulk, you're already discounting books that are being purchased. So then to turn around and feel compelled to give it away for free,
Mhm.
I think that that's an injustice to, and kind of disrespectful. It's like devaluing the fact that we are putting
Yeah.
in a lot of work to publish these books. I mean, and you might feel differently when it comes to your book because while yours is not a children's book, I do think that it will lend in a high school classroom for those people who are getting ready to graduate and go into this corporate world where DIE is almost going away. I mean, what are your feelings on affirmative action?
Yeah. I think, yeah, with the Supreme Court reversing affirmative action, it has been, uh, it's really been a domino effect for
Mhm.
like everything DEI in the workplace. Uh, they're going beyond what Supreme Court actually did. Like, well, they almost like feel the writing on or see the writing on the wall. Say, well, if they if they're reversing this, then they probably don't support that, and they're just continuously moving away from it. But I feel like there's so many things that a company and universities can still do
Mhm.
without, without worrying about what the Supreme Court said. And I think a lot of organizations are just kind of using that as a cop out, saying, "Well, Supreme Court said this, so now we're going to disband everything that we're doing." But it doesn't say that as a university you can't go recruit at predominantly black neighborhoods or high schools and go recruit black students. Doesn't say you can't recruit black students. So there's still intentional initiatives to
Mhm.
help uh, diversify, bring racial diversity to the workplace that you can still do.
Okay.
So I feel like
Well,
they didn't ban everything. They didn't ban everything. So like when it comes to the performative stuff, I feel like the performative stuff kind of got banned. Like if it's but that deep systemic change you could still do regardless of what the Supreme Court said. Um, there's a lot of things you can still do.
oh, that's so great to hear. And thank you so much for coming to hang out. Tell everybody how they can connect with you, get your books, where they can find you, follow you, and kind of stay in contact with you as you continue to write books that's going to change the world that we live in.
Thank you, Dr. Gurley. www.andrewbeamon.com. You can find me there on that website. On Instagram, it is _Beamon, BEAMON. And you could also find me on LinkedIn. So Instagram, LinkedIn, a website, you can find me. And yeah, it was a pleasure joining you today.
Yes, we
Good, I
thank
can't
you so
wait.
much for hanging out. Yes, and so for everybody who wants to hit that playback, make sure you follow the BGBB Literacy Foundation or the Brown Girl and Brown Boy Literacy Foundation YouTube channel. Follow us on all social media. Like, comment, subscribe. We're going to be having this chat for a little while going, just chatting with different authors every week. And we're excited to have you all on the platform, really wanting to address this world that we live in. So, you know what, we'll see you all back hopefully next week sometime. We don't have, this is one of our newer initiative series that we have going on, but it warrants the conversations because, literacy does affect us all. Tune in next time. We'll see you when we see you. Bye.
Thank you.